Okay, good evening and welcome to this session of Evening Hackney. First item on the agenda is welcome and apologies. Welcome everyone here this evening.
Bit of feedback on somebody's laptop over there, if you want to mute it.
Thank you. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed now. Please can you all keep your microphones on mute throughout the meeting, as this will help prevent audio feedback as we just experienced. And if you'd like to speak, both those in the committee room and virtually, please raise your hand and we'll get to you as soon as possible. For those online, the function must not be used to have conversations with other participants other than to provide to alert you to points that you wish to speak on, or to raise points of order, or to report tech problems. Officers are on hand to support anyone who does experience any problems of any kind. This is a formal meeting of Hackney Council, and please note the press may be in attendance, by that probably virtually, and the rights of the press and public to record and film the meeting do apply. Apologies for absence. Sadly, Councillor Ian Rathbone today. Other than that, we are all no more. No more. Sorry, thank you.
Okay.
Other than that, we are all in attendance. Second item on the agenda is urgent items or orders of business. There are no urgent items. Third item on the agenda: declarations of interest. Councillor Ogudu Moran.
Yeah, thank you. I'm a Hackney Council resident. So, yeah, just wanted to declare that in relation to what we're going to be discussing today.
Thank you very much. No others? We'll move on swiftly. Agenda item 4, changes to the housing register and lettings policy. In October 2021, the council changed its letting policy and how it allocates social housing. The Commission has requested this item as it's keen to hear about how the new lettings policy has affected residents since its implementation. The Commission will be assisted in its discussions today by the contributions from Hackney Council officers, alongside the written submissions enclosed in the agenda pack and supplementary papers which take the form of the reports. This discussion will cover the advice and guidance in place for residents that no longer qualify for the register and to those that face a long wait or that are unlikely to get rehoused. The impact of the policy on prioritising residents in the greatest need and providing more predictable outcomes. As well as those officers in attendance, we may invite other people to speak on these items as well. Look, these are not members of the public, but any of the other people who haven't responded in terms of the report may respond to some of the questions that are raised. Formally attending for the item are Councillor Sade Etty, Mayoral Advisor for Housing Needs and Homelessness, she's virtual. Steve Waddington, Strategic Director of Housing, again virtual. Rob Miller, Strategic Director of Customer and Workplace. Is he online?
He should be in person, but I think he's running slightly late.
Okay, he's running slightly late, so apologies from him. Jennifer Winter, Head of Benefits and Housing Needs, she's online. Marcia Farsi or Facey, I'm sorry, you will have to correct me in terms of the pronunciation of your surname. Operations Manager, Benefits and Housing Needs, virtual. Ian Jones, Legislation Strategy and Projects Officer, Customer Services, virtual. I can't see, possibly, but I can't see him on the screen at the moment. Zoe Tyndall, Change Support Team Manager, Digital and Data, again virtual. And Sally Caldwell, TPX Impact, virtual. I'd like to welcome Councillor Etty and the Hackney Council officers to the meeting this evening. Thank you very much for attending. I'd also like to welcome Sally Caldwell from TPX Impact, which is a digital transformation consultancy that has supported the council in redesigning some of its housing needs services. I'd like to invite the relevant officer to give a brief presentation to supplement the written submissions received in advance of this meeting. And you will be given 10 minutes for this presentation and we'll then take questions. Sally's not in attendance. Thank you very much. Thank you. So I believe we've got, is it Jennifer Winter doing the initial response?
No, I will.
Councillor Etty, sorry. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair, and also thank you to all Commission members. Apologies, I'm not there in person because I wouldn't want to be coughing slightly, and I just wanted to play safe. And before we go into the questions, and based on the response that we've submitted, I just wanted to give a brief overview on the situation with regards to our housing crisis, and within a few minutes. And the reason why, so that it's just a context, to give you a much more deeper context for us to have a much broader conversation. In 2001, the average house prices in Hackney was 139,000. In 2002, this has increased to 705,000 pounds. Thereby, it's bringing an increase of over 407%, and it's still the biggest anywhere in the UK. And for anyone to be able to buy a house in Hackney, I mean, at that, we definitely will have a household income of 140,000 and a deposit of 70,000, which sincerely, it's not reflecting in terms of our residents that we really care about. And that has also impacted on increase when it comes to rent. But the key problem that we've had in the past years with regards to the rent is, in terms of housing benefits, is the local housing allowance. The local housing allowance is the amount of money in which the council can use to support low-income families that are renting from private sector housing. And unfortunately, before 2013, the local housing allowance was linked to the local cost of rent, which means if rent went up, the local housing allowance will also go up. So vice versa, and also the level of support. But since 2013, the legislation has removed that, and it has been frozen since 2013. I wanted to bring this to your attention and the attention of all members, so that you'll be able to see some of the challenges we've been going through since 2013. Despite increasing house rent, the LHA has been frozen for 8 solid years. And in the past, we had over how many council homes were available? Talking about 2016, 2017, we have 1,229 or thereabout. But as of last year, 2019, 2020, we had only 409 council homes that were available for the year. So, and I mean, I'll stop there and then call in Jennifer Winter. And when we are talking about various options that our residents are facing, that's why residents continue to face, bad options when we're talking about overcrowding. People crowd into homes which aren't big enough, and they could either be exploited by road landlords or moving in with family and friends. It's a concern to all of us, and that's why some has to move to a cheaper area. But at the same time, you will bear with me that moving to a cheaper area and living in the London Borough of Hackney leaves them to living in terms of the communities and the network that they've had. But at the same time, we continue to do what? We continue to ensure that those who have present as homeless to the council and they have the link to the area and the level of vulnerability, we continue to ensure that we place them in temporary accommodation, though we still have some that are outside the borough. I'll leave it at that, but I just wanted to give you a short context of some of the challenges we're facing before we go strictly into into the questions. And I'll hand over to Jennifer Winter to say a few words, another key officers, and then we'll take it on from there, Chair. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair and panel. I'm Jennifer Winter, I'm Head of Benefits and Housing Needs Service. Just to let you know, for the record, that Andrew Croucher is here instead of Ian Jones, and Sally Caldwell is not in attendance today as her contract has finished with TPX. Rob Miller will be covering that part of the agenda for us. So I just want to say a few words before I hand over to Andrew and Marcia, who will take you through the questions. Following on from what Councillor Etty said, I think it's important to update you on housing crisis changes over the last few months. As you can imagine, with central government issues, as volatile as they have been, that's had an effect on the property market and the housing market. And we've seen some unprecedented results of that and the worsening housing crisis since June. What does that mean in practical terms? It means we've seen a very large increase in families approaching us as homeless, particularly those fleeing domestic abuse and gang violence. What we're seeing is larger and larger families approaching us for emergency temporary accommodation, at the same time that we're seeing landlords pulling out of the housing market. That also includes temporary accommodation providers. We are seeing 30% less privately rented properties available now than we were before the pandemic, and the private rented sector in London is constricting for the first time. The property market is extremely buoyant. If you are a homeless family and you approach us for temporary accommodation today in Hackney Service Centre, we would have been able to offer you the closest location we could have offered you for a bed for the night would have been Dudley, Wolverhampton, Coventry, or Derby. If you're a single homeless person, we may have been able to place you in Crawley. We are seeing TA providers and private landlords in London, as I said, taking their properties back. And we currently have 45 properties that we are being pursued legally to hand back to those landlords for their own purposes. Many of them stepping down from the rental market and not selling their properties on. We are seeing increased demand from households in the private rented sector who are overcrowded, as well as those in the social housing sector. And capital letters, who are the local authority owned and funded along with Department of Levelling Up Communities and Housing Company, has managed to provide us with absolutely zero properties since September, because there are none to be had at a local housing allowance rate or below within the borough. At this point, I can't paint a bleak enough picture for you of the housing crisis. Many of my staff work within the borough and live within the borough as well. They're Hackney residents, born and bred. A few of my managers have been in this council for more than 30 years and in the sector for longer. They have never seen it as bad as they have now. On the back of that, I'll keep you updated in future, as I always do, on how things progress. But on the back of that, I'm going to hand over to Andrew and Marcia just to update you on the questions that are tabled for this evening. Andrew, are you starting?
I'm going to be starting, Jennifer.
Thanks, Mark.
Hi, Chair, and how the rest of the panel. So for your question one was, what has been put in place to provide housing advice and guidance to residents that no longer qualify for the register and to those who face a long wait or that they are likely to be housed? So just to put some context around when we made the changes to the policy changes removed over 5,000 residents from the waiting list. Of those that were removed, nearly 3,000 were in the reserve band, and that was a band that were for residents that were housed in their assessed bedroom needs. So we would say they were adequately housed. When we went out to the residents to let them know they were going to be removed from the waiting list or housing register, we only received 5% of queries back from the 3,000 residents that we removed. It was a higher percentage for those that were previously in the general band, and that was because they were deemed to lack one bedroom or one room. And we received 17% of residents that queried why they were being removed. Of those, 50% were Hackney housing tenants. Overall, of the 5,000 residents that were removed from the register, only 10% raised an inquiry as to why they were being removed. So just giving you some context into the very small numbers of residents that contacted us when they were removed from the register. I can assure you that we've dealt with every single one of those residents from the general band and the reserve band that queried why they were being removed. Every single one of those residents have been contacted or have been sent the link to rejoin the housing register if they qualified to do so. So what have we put in place to assist those residents that we removed? We have a personal dedicated housing advice and support for residents. There are teams set up to help residents find suitable privately rented accommodation. We have an enhanced mutual exchange that Hackney Housing have set up, and there was a housing event for residents during March this year, and I'm sure they've scheduled some more to take place for residents. For those residents that have been removed from the register, we know there's a limited supply of options available to them, but we are aware that we need to do what we've put in place to assist those residents that can no longer join the register is operating like what we put in place is a shared plan. So each resident has an individual tailored plan when they contact us. So they're assisted across all the service areas in within the Benefits and Housing Needs Service. An example of a recent success is, I know we've got an example in the pack that I've given, but a most recent example that Jennifer can give us is when she attended court recently. And I don't know if you want to just explain, Jennifer, what happened with this resident.
So I attended the Court of Protection the week before last at the request of our barristers. I was attending to give an update on the housing situation and the housing register for a couple who are Hackney housing tenants. I was on the stand for between an hour and 90 minutes, being questioned by their three counsel and the judge around their prospective housing options. The couple are trying to secure larger premises so they can apply to have their child back into their care. And once I'd given them the information around their prospective chances of getting a larger property, considering they had medical recommendations that meant they needed a 2-bed ground floor property with level access inside and a wet room, it became fairly easy to recognise that they also, because they wanted this premises only within the N16 area to facilitate their autistic daughter's schooling, they very quickly realised that that kind of property does not exist. I was able to go on to Rightmove and show them that actually, even if they went for a privately rented home, that property does not exist. There are no ground floor 2-bedroom properties with disabled access in N16 that are available, let alone at local housing allowance rates that their benefit would cover. They then made a decision that they wanted to seek privately rented accommodation. They are now looking in the Palmer's Green area. They have a named officer within our housing supply team that will negotiate immediately with any landlord that they find with the right property to secure that property for them within 24 hours. They will also be able to access financial support to assist them with a rent in advance and deposit and removal costs. They also have a shared plan, which consists of the work they are doing with their daughter's social worker, our officer, the officer in Marcia's area, and also the housing officer, who are all working together to support this family. Within 48 hours of having left court, our officer had found them 2 social housing properties that fit the bill, that were 2-bedroom, ground floor. One was in Greenwich and one was in Bromley. However, they didn't feel they were suitable for them and they refused those properties. So there are options for people. There are realistic and available options for people. And I'm really pleased that we are able to give them support to access these. So I thought that was just a good example.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. But could I just advise officers that we have already gone over the time allocated for the kind of addressing of the questions. So I don't know whether things could be expedited somewhat in terms of your presentation.
Okay, I'll hand you over to Andrew.
Good evening, Chair, panel. My name's Andrew Croucher. I'm one of the operations managers in benefits and housing needs. The last two questions that you've asked offers. Firstly is, how is resident voice and experience used to shape the service, and how effective has this been at improving outcomes? I'd say that at this stage it's a little early to give you any meaningful outcomes because of the way that the service has been affected by the cyber attack, and just because of the lengthy wait times that we have in what still remains a fairly large number of people on the housing register. But we don't underestimate the value of residents' experiences of service delivery. And in delivering the new IT system, we've included small groups of residents trialing iterations of the online form so that we can gradually change that to be more reflective of their experience and their understanding of the process, making it more user-friendly so that we gather more information more accurately at the earlier stages so that we can effectively get that right first time, so that we're not putting people onto the housing register incorrectly, or that we're not assessing them based on incorrect information. We have a dedicated complaints team within benefits and housing needs that falls under my remit. We use the information that we have from that team to understand why residents are complaining, what they're concerned about, what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. And we utilise that information to develop the service to make sure we're addressing those concerns. We've also made recent presentations to the advocacy groups within Hackney, so people like Citizens Advice Bureau, Hackney Law Centre, covering many of the issues that Jennifer's already highlighted to you around the severe crisis we have in Hackney, but also the support that we're able to give them and their clients in addressing their needs and what options are available to them when joining the housing register and social housing isn't a viable option. To improve our communication with residents, the Benefits and Housing Needs Service is funding a content designer post to work with the Behavioural Insights Officer, which hopefully will provide better information at first point of contact for residents so that they understand their situation and what options there are for them and what actions they need to take in partnership with the service to meet their housing needs. I'll move on to the third question. What impact has the policy had on prioritising residents in the greatest need and providing more predictable outcomes? The second part of that question is relatively easy to answer. The new scheme itself is open and clear and does provide a predictable outcome. Once a resident has got over that hurdle of eligibility, they will go onto the housing register and primarily be ranked in date order of their application. There are some minor changes to that during the course of someone's period on the register if they move from one band to another, but primarily it's a very predictable process. Those applicants who have been longest on the list are more likely to be more successful when bidding for properties. With regard to prioritising residents in the greatest need, we've already established that those in greatest need are the ones that get on the register. And the new scheme has deliberately not reprioritised or introduced any different priorities once those residents have got into that hurdle and gone on to band B within the register, which is where the majority of residents are. It's assumed, based on their eligibility, that they're all in need. Their needs might be slightly different, but they're all in great need. So they're on the register, they're ranked in order of their application, so it levels out that playing field so that predictably residents will be more successful bidding the longer they've been on the register and the more frequently and more appropriately they bid for properties. So it's a limited success at the moment just because we don't have long-term data to be able to back that up. But what we've seen so far demonstrates that it's a very predictable and transparent process. I think Rob is going to answer the ICT question. Is that right, Jennifer?
Did you want that covered, or would you prefer to ask questions about the kind of the lettings policy first, Chair?
Yeah, we're very limited on time, so yeah, I think we kind of focus initially at this stage.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we've got a first question from Councillor Joseph.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry. Thank you very much for the presentations. Oh, is that right? Can you hear me?
There's some kind of echo.
There's a little bit of feedback.
I'm off.
All right. I'll just go ahead. So, yes, thanks very much. So if I can just go to the document, item 4, page 12, where the personalised dedicated housing support is discussed. I'd just like to understand a little bit more about our enhanced mutual exchange. Initially, I was quite optimistic about this, and I thought it was a very good idea to match social tenants up in Hackney, perhaps matching up housing association tenants as well as council tenants who are in need of a move or a swap. And I did attend an initial event last year, but it was essentially a presentation about Home Swapper, which is obviously a pre-existing national online system that a lot of our tenants are already on, and it can take really quite a long time if you're looking to upsize. So I'll be building a specific kind of Hackney controlled database of social tenants that want to upsize or downsize. That's my question about the mutual exchange. And then in terms of finding people privately rented accommodation, I suppose I'd like to know, are we planning to look at the long-term outcomes as a measure of success? So in terms of how long people have actually stayed in that private rented sector home, rather than are they just going in there for a couple of months and becoming evicted and just stuck in a bit of a vicious cycle. So just an elaboration really on the support that's being offered to those people who've been taken off is my first question. Thank you.
Thank you. Do officers want to respond at this stage, or do you rather take additional questions?
Yeah, shall we respond as we go along, Rob?
Okay.
So, Marcia, did you want to come back on the private tenants in a moment? On the mutual exchange, on page...
Rob, you'll need to
Oh, sorry. See if I can do this without creating an echo. That okay? So on the mutual exchange, managed by our colleagues in the housing service, there's been a bit of staff change there at the moment. So the head of service, we want to speak to it, recently retired, so that's been posted yet. There was an event, I think it was in March, Councillor Etty, which you attended around mutual exchange. And my teams in ICT have been working with in housing, looking at the mutual exchange process. It's actually when you run the mapping process around it, which is extraordinarily complicated at the moment. So they're looking at ways that they can make that a slicker and simpler process for people. On page 54 of the pack, there's one example of just how complicated some of the mutual exchanges that are set up can be. So I think the one that's in there covers from just north of Lowestoft, Swansea and Hackney. So One of the things I think, Marcia, that you had mentioned that colleagues in housing have found is that where people are considering downsizing, they prefer to be within a specific area. They prefer accessible properties, which for very understandable reasons, but then that narrows the number of properties available. So I think that's still an area of focus which colleagues in housing has been looking at. I think the event, I wasn't able to make it, but I think, Councillor Etty, it was well attended and it was a positive event. I think that's the sort of thing that I believe colleagues in housing keen to do more of. And I think if we can start to look at the process together as well to make that slicker for people, you can make sure that we can move the opportunities forward, because obviously if they're hanging for a long time, then that would then make the chance of it moving forward less successful. But I think that map on page 50 really just shows you how complicated some of those cases can be.
It's impossible to respond. We wait for the second. I mean, I just really wanted to clarify, are we building our own Hackney mutual exchange kind of app or database, or are we purely reliant on the pre-existing service like Home Swipper?
So, no, as far as I'm aware, the council has no plans to do that and never has. The established programme, the established portal for that is Home Swapper, which is supported by every registered provider and every council. So has the most amount of properties on it and the most amount of people wanting to move. So I don't quite understand what just a Hackney-centric one would do rather than narrow the pool, because what we've found is that most people that have achieved a successful mutual exchange, as far as I'm aware, are those who have moved out of the borough to be near other members of family and friends. So no, we're not. With regards to your question on the private rented sector and tenancy sustainment, we do not support residents to achieve a letting or a tenancy within the private rented sector that they can't afford. So we conduct an affordability assessment. We advise the person on what they can afford and what they can't afford. Landlords of privately rented properties are acutely aware of affordability as well, and some of them will also conduct their own affordability assessments. So we never place people in a position where we know they can't maintain or sustain a tenancy. That goes against our whole homelessness prevention statutory duty. As a result of that, we don't have people who move into privately renting and then can't afford it after a few months, because we wouldn't assist them to go into that situation. In my service, we provide a full tenancy sustainment service for people that we place in the private rented sector, and that's very successful.
Can I just add to that? Thank you so much, Councillor Joseph. I mean, when we're looking at the personal housing plan, in addition to what Jennifer has said with regards to private rented sector, the personal housing plan is actually, it enables the personal assessment of the residents, so to work with the officer. So by so doing, we will not be encouraging residents to move into PRS that they will not be able to afford, because they will have to look at the circumstances of their homelessness. They will have to look at the housing needs on their households. They will have to look at the type of accommodation and also what the household requires. So those are some of the, and any support needs that might be required. So the suitability of the accommodation will be looked into in terms of, and also based on what everyone has said. So the basic assessment will be done between the officer and also the resident. So which definitely is a two-way agreement to say that this is what I'll be doing with regards to possibly my homelessness or intention to be homeless, and definitely doing what the resident will be doing. So it's a two-way, and we ensure that, and in most cases, I can confirm to you that we have had, if I can count, about 5 or over how many emails talking back to officers to say thank you, based on that, because it's always very detailed, and I want Jennifer, Marcia, to talk more on trauma centered approach, because we were able, we understand what people are going through, and we really have to be very careful in having that conversation with them, to be realistic about the conversation, and in order to minimize their expectation, because we know what has happened, we know what has happened with COVID, we know the impact of cost of living in crisis and the fuel and all the circumstances within the environment. And that is why the personal housing plan is very, very important when we're moving forward with residents in the borough in terms of helping them in further action. And with regards to mutual exchange, we had a very good event in March, and that's in conjunction with housing services. And just like everyone have said, they have to go through Homes for Power. But what we tend to do is we're not only looking at mutual exchange, we'll be looking at all other options in order to bring out all the other options. We intend to have another face-to-face event in order to bring this house and also work in conjunction with our housing association members as well, so that we'll take this forward. So not only within Hackney alone, but also working in conjunction with our partners within housing association, where we are talking about mutual exchange. Those are some of the events that we'll be doing in conjunction with housing services when it comes to the housing needs. And in terms of our objectives, because looking at everything,
Can we just get a few more questions in, please? Because we're quite limited in terms of
okay,
this.
that's fine. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Young, thank you.
Hi, can you hear me all right online? So just thinking about the people in this transition period who are, for example, only overcrowded by one bedroom. I just want to get a bit of a sense of I think it's called a customer journey for somebody. So if I was on the register and I'm only overcrowded by one bedroom, I've received my letter. I think when I've seen the letter, it's quite a long letter saying, we've changed the policy and you're now going to drop off the register and here's what we can offer you. If I understand it correctly, there were 5,000 people removed and 10% got in touch. So 500 got in touch. Right, my maths is awful. What would I have experienced then? So firstly, I'd have rung up, would I? And hopefully got through in the customer service centre. Then what?
So I can answer that. What we did is that we would contact the residents. They would complete a Google form, sort of like an inquiry sheet, and it would take the details of what their inquiry was about. We would then have an officer call back the resident and discuss the alternative options available to them. And Councillor Etty mentioned trauma-informed care. So we're having all our officers trained up to provide a customer trauma-informed service, and that is to achieve a positive outcome for residents, changing the behaviour of just sitting on the housing register and looking at alternative options that are available to them, as limited as they may be, for them to think of alternative options rather than just sitting waiting on the waiting list for years and years and years. What else is there out there that we can assist you with moving into alternative settled accommodation? So the officer will keep in contact with the resident. If it means they have a change of circs and they have to join the register again, that's fine. But we do have the officers keeping in contact with the residents. If it's a Hackney housing tenant, we would work in conjunction with the Hackney housing officers to make sure that that resident is fully supported with whatever decision they decide to make about how they'd like to be rehoused.
Do you mind if I just dig into it a little bit?
Okay.
So I just want a bit of a sense of, so you ring back, do you keep ringing back if they don't answer the phone the first time because they're at work, or what does fully supported mean? What am I experiencing as that resident in the Hackney? For example, if I live in Hackney Homes and I'm 1 bedroom overcrowded, what am I going to experience as a resident in that support? So this, personalised support, housing advice, how can we separate out the support element of that? Or will I just have had a phone call asking me to fill in a Google form? What would happen for me next? And what would carry on happening until I have resolved my situation?
Well, with the Hackney housing, sorry, Jennifer.
I think it depends on the individual and their willingness to have a conversation about it. We are fully receptive. What we find with the majority of our tenants within Hackney Housing is that they are engaged with their housing officers. They're aware of the situation. We quite often get comments about, well, I didn't think I'd get anything anyway. And there's very much, how can I put it, a realization, a coming to terms with reality, that there are not lots of properties available that we have stashed round the back somewhere that we're giving to somebody else. We're trying to be as open and as transparent as we possibly can be. And one of the things we'd like to do to push for that and to try and make that even more evident to tenants and residents across the piece is to start to develop an annual lettings plan. So rather than purely reporting back to residents on how many properties we've let and whom to, what we'd like to be able to do as a council is to publish in advance how many properties we anticipate becoming available and who they will go to, i.e. how many might go to decant existing regeneration tenants or existing Hackney tenants on our regeneration estates, how many units will come to the housing register, down to what size and what characteristic. And that's something that's considered good practice and is carried out by a number of local authorities across London, but to my knowledge hasn't happened in Hackney before. So what we're trying to do is be as clear as possible, and that's one of the tools we'd like to do, like to bring in to support that.
Thank you. Next question from Councillor Palace.
Yeah, I firstly just want to pay testament to officers. This is one of the most difficult areas council has to deal with. The casework that I get through, and I'm sure other colleagues get through. Is it on? Yeah. Oh no, it's not staying on. Let's try this one. Yeah. The casework I get through, I'm sure other colleagues get through, is absolutely heartbreaking, and it's this is a crisis made by a Tory government that does not believe in social housing, that is not helping the most vulnerable in the private rented sector, and despite all the fact that it is building social housing, but not at the rate of demand. So I very much appreciate that. I've just got two questions. In the presentation, it says 17% of queries came from those who were on the previous general ban, and 10% came from, I think, the reserve. So I don't know whether you've got this plan, but would you be able to kind of outline what the outcomes in terms of numbers were of those inquiries? So what happened to those people who made inquiries? Did some of them end up on the housing register? Did some of them end up in the private rented sector? Do we have the numbers for that? Because that would be really, I think, informative understanding how this is working in practice. And then my second question is about, you know, the very difficult situation we have in terms of temporary accommodation, and obviously not being able to, you know, necessarily, you know, match the demand within borough. So, you know, you mentioned Dudley, Wolverhampton, Derby, these you know, places where accommodation is kind of is happening, and I just wondered how we're ensuring the kind of standards of temporary accommodation and reaching the highest standards, because I have had instances of residents coming in contact with me and raising several issues about the standards of temporary accommodation. So it'd just be good to get an idea about how we are ensuring the highest standards there, especially when they're out of the borough.
I can answer the first question, and I'm just going to give an overview because I'm aware we're short on time. So of the 100, we had 120 residents from the reserve band contact us. Of those, 107 were sent links out to apply to rejoin the housing register. Of those, only 77 returned the completed the application form, and 13 we didn't send links out to because they were obviously a different arrangement was put in place for them. In regards to the forms that were returned, it's not, I don't have to hand what the outcomes were for those 77, but it's something we can get back to you on. With the general ban cases, we had 391 that contacted us. We sent out 333 links to the residents, and out of those, 50% were returned. So 115 of the residents returned those forms. And again, I'd have to go into a bit more detail as to what the outcomes of those of that was. So we can get back to you on that.
Thank you. Is there a follow-up from anyone? No, Martin said she could only do the first part.
So with regard to the second question, Chair, as it's around temporary accommodation, I'm assuming you want me to save this until the temporary accommodation hearing in February?
I apologise.
Yeah, thank you.
Would it be okay to, I think picking up on, sorry, press number, as Councillor Palace observed, it's an extraordinarily complicated and challenging problem. One of the things that we're working on across the council is to try and organise ourselves effectively across the council to do our best to join up and make sure we're supporting people. So some of the examples given in the paper about that are things like the multidisciplinary teams, which Jennifer and teams have set up with colleagues in adult social care and colleagues in children's social care to make sure that complicated cases aren't getting trapped in the process. So the teams come together on a monthly basis, I think, Jen, I just will sit in on those as well, and make sure that individuals who are arrested for that, the relevant leads from those specialist areas, and together with colleagues from health in as well, to make sure we're really understanding the cases, understanding the steps being taken, and understanding the support needed. We're also, as Marcia said, we've been working to, I'll talk about that in a minute with the cyber recovery, we're working to make the access to these services often simpler, but we know that some people find it difficult to complete online processes, so we're trying to make sure that we don't leave those people behind as well. So Jennifer, Marcia and team work very closely with the colleagues in customer services. We've increased the number of terminals available inside the customer service centre. The colleagues from customer services are there to help people work through the process. We're not simply saying there's a link and if you can't access it, then you're stuck. And also the team that Zoe's leading, working really closely with Jen. And something I don't know whether we've picked up in the paper, it's just how important it is that at Hackney we have that join of housing benefits and housing needs. So where we're looking at a situation where we're not able to provide social housing in many cases, that work that Jennifer was describing about making sure we're supporting people to financial sustainability, we're doing work to make sure that people are accessing benefits which they might be entitled to but aren't claiming. I forget the numbers, Zoe, but it's an extraordinary, I think about 50% of people entitled to pension credits aren't claiming those. So we're trying to make sure that we're using the data we hold to help us identify people who we think should be applying, so that we can help them make sure that they've got the money so that they can find the right housing solutions wherever possible. So it's an extraordinarily complicated problem, but we're seeing officers across the council and services working ever more integrated ways. We've got more to do. We've got further that we want to do, and we're doing a lot of work to try and help make sure that we're bringing people together around the problem, not turning into, well, that belongs in that department, that belongs in that department. So it's an ongoing ambition.
Right, I've got a couple more questions to fit in. I see Councillor Etsy's raised a hand. If it could be as succinct as possible, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I just wanted to echo what Rob was saying in terms of joint work, because when we're looking at the response on housing advice line, I mean, that is something that they've been able to split into homelessness, housing advice, temporary accommodation fees. So thereby, it's very easy to prioritize service to the residents, and to avoid a situation where residents were saying that they were on the phone for a long time in terms of not being responded to. I mean, we've had to draft in extra 10 staff in order to improve that. And I can comfortably tell everyone that we've seen good improvement within the waiting times. It's been halved under 20 minutes, and that has really improved. So we continue to look at ways to improve. And like I said, it's a joint up. We're doing a lot of joint up with other services, and it's not just housing and benefit needs alone. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We've got Councillor Love next.
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to just add my thanks to the team as well, like echoing what Councillor Palace was saying about this really, really difficult situation that you're working in. I have two quick questions. One's on how ridiculously competitive the private market has become. And I know that it's noted here around the incentive payment that landlords made. And I know from kind of supporting casework and maybe others too as well, that even with that incentive payment, often the council does not achieve those properties. So I wondered if you had a kind of an understanding or a percentage or an idea of how often that happens. I mean, even with the incentive payment, those properties don't go to the council, those tenants. And if there's any consideration in increasing that, because it's already obviously quite large. And then linked to that, what we do to make sure landlords are then providing a good service to the tenants and making sure that those properties are kept in kind of good condition. And then a quick side question just on resident experience and voice, and just obviously you mentioned kind of designing comms, and I wondered if residents are engaged in kind of that kind of thing as well, if they're in design it.
Thanks. I'll pick up the first one, and then maybe Zoe, Andrew, if you want to come in on the second. So with regards to landlords' incentives, we tread a very careful line, as you can imagine. We have had since 2014, which is no mean feat, what we call an interborough area agreement across London, which is all local authorities apart from Kensington and Chelsea have agreed pan-London rates for procurement, and that includes incentive rates, which ensures that we don't outbid and gazump each other and perversely increase rents even more. I'm really, really pleased. It's been very hard work holding the line, particularly across the whole of London for all those years. We're still holding the line. We don't allow landlords to play us off against each other. Even though it's becoming increasingly difficult. What we've found since COVID is there's been a complete flip in the reluctance in landlords to let people in receipt of benefits. So prior to COVID, what we saw was that landlords wanted people in work. Because work is now seen as less stable than benefits income, we've seen a complete reversal of that. So for the first time ever this year and last year, we've started to see landlords wanting to find tenants on benefits rather than those who are in low paid work, which is very interesting. We have to react incredibly quickly. A property that goes on the market at 9 a.m. in the morning is probably gone by 11 a.m. Competition is so fierce, and that's not just in Hackney, that's across the whole of London. With an ever decreasing supply and an ever increasing demand, we anticipate that will continue to be the case for the next few years, unless something changes very quickly. What that means is that our officers have to respond very quickly, within minutes of finding a property. We do gas and electricity safety checks. We ask for photos of the property, follow up with inspections afterwards. Otherwise, you could lose the property. So we work as quickly as we can to secure those properties. Sometimes we get them, sometimes we don't. I'm not sure if we would have detailed enough information on that, but we have front loaded our resource in that area to ensure that we maximise every opportunity for every property that becomes available. Andrew, sorry, comms?
Yeah, I'm going to come in on that one. So it was referenced earlier on that we've created a new post to come and work on lots of the comms around housing needs decisions, and that person will absolutely work with groups of residents to hear that resident voice in the design of those. So that's the first stage. But then secondly, we'll also use actual testing methods. So we'll take different framings of how we communicate the same thing, test it with resident groups and see which ones are the most effective in changing behaviour. Because we know what people say in a co-design group isn't always the same thing as what leads to the changed behaviours ultimately. So we do that on a small scale, but we've used that approach in the other work that Rob mentioned, which is benefits uptake, and it's I think it's really important to make sure we're hearing what people are saying.
Thank you. A quick question from me now. Oh, do you want to go first?
I'll let you go on.
Okay. I think mine essentially relates to the personalised housing plans. In the December meeting, we advised that the whole kind of change in policy approach was also about releasing resources. We've heard elements within the responses from officers and Councillor Etty today. However, I just would like to kind of understand how far removed the template for the personal plans that we are using in Hackney, how far removed are they from the personal housing plan templates that we have a statutory duty to produce when someone is eligible for housing or assistance, whether homeless or threatened with homeless. And also, I mean, I'd like to highlight that there has been a mixed bag in terms of responses nationally to this kind of approach. So have we done any kind of evaluation or cross-checking with what worked in other authorities before we implemented them? Or is there ongoing cross-discussions that are happening in terms of developing these sorts of plans? And also in terms of resources and officer time, how much time is allocated to individual care? I know it's not a kind of precise science, but just trying to ensure that people who approach us are getting the best possible outcomes in terms of the time that's given over to them, despite the kind of pressures on the service. I'd just like to kind of understand how much time is generally given over to these plans, whether it's an ongoing process or whether it's kind of more kind of perfunctory for more, okay, there's immediate crises which occur where there's kind of all gung-ho in terms of the approach from officers, but for those kind of more generic, you know, people in band Bs or so forth, the ongoing nature of dialogue with the council is of interest to me in respect to their housing plans and the resources which are given over to kind of support people longer term. Thank you.
We use the statutory personal housing plan template as a template. That's our core business in homelessness. It's what we do day in, day out. We're very familiar with it. And in fact, I think we do very good personal housing plans in comparison to other boroughs. The thing about a personal housing plan, it is led by the person. We don't do things to people. We assist people to make decisions that are right for them and give them support when they need it. So we will have an initial conversation with a tenant or with a resident around their personal housing plan and what they want to achieve. They will then make decisions about how they want to do that, about what is important to them. So if space is important to them rather than location, then that is something that we can work with. With regards to things like the wider bit around, say, for employment and training, we would probably signpost rather than actively support them ourselves, because there is already an existing council department that do that work. So if somebody feels that they want to increase their income to obtain a larger property, we do explain to them that that would probably mean a property, an income of more than £50,000 per year to obtain somewhere larger within Hackney. If that's something they want to try for, then we would signpost them to Hackney Works, so they could access those services to support them with that. But with regards to finding property, looking at property options, that is most definitely our bag, but it is very much resident-led.
So it's just a quick follow-up. So in terms of any kind of ideas or suggestions which are put forward in the plan, there's no potential for people then to be removed from the register if some of the suggestions aren't followed, such as actively seeking private rental accommodation. That's not something which would then see. Okay.
No, a personal housing plan is not punitive.
Thank you. We've got two more. Councillor Ogunde Muren and then Councillor Root or Rout, I've heard people. Root, it's a Root, thank you.
Oh, that's great. Okay. Hi. Yeah. So, what's going on? Let's try again.
There you go.
Okay. Yeah. You don't hear me? All right. But yeah, like my colleagues, I'd like to thank you all the officers in terms of the work that you're doing, especially in challenging times, and the reports that you've put together. My question is, what sort of proactive or intelligence-led work are the council doing to kind of tackle tenancy fraud and get properties back that should be used for its intended contractual social housing purposes? And has there been an increase or decrease in terms of the properties we've managed to get back since the new housing register has been implemented?
I can probably take that one. None of us work in the audit and anti-fraud team, so it's not really our area. But I have seen the recent comms that have gone out to say that the audit and anti-fraud team have secured their 1,000th social housing property back since 2010. So I see that as a level of success. That's probably as much as I can give you on that question without them being present.
Thank you.
I think we can get back to the commission with regards to the details of that. Find out from the department and get back to the commission on that.
Yeah, there was a paper at the recent audit committee, so I'll share it with Craig. We can circulate.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, mine is a very, very quick question, which I'm just wondering, since we've lost all these people from the register, what impact has that made on housing officers' caseload? Are they now dealing with fewer cases? Is that meaning that they have more time that they can spend with people? How does that, have we done a sort of benefit analysis in that regard?
So at the moment, we're still processing, we're still in the transition phase. So we are still manually supporting those residents who are on the housing register who've had a change in circumstances. We're still manually working through those cases to input their change of circumstances as we catch up from the impact of the cyber attack. So until the transition phase is completed, we won't be able to release staff from the housing register into other parts of the service.
Just to follow on from what Jennifer said, everyone that's existing on the housing register that would need to be transferred over to the new software. So there's a piece of work in the transition for residents that were already existing, that weren't removed, that need to go on to the new software.
Can I just ask a follow-up question then? Because from what Jennifer just said, it seems that you're looking at actually reducing the number of staff working on housing needs related issues, which frankly is a bit disappointing, really. Because
no, I never said that. Housing needs is a very large service. The benefits and housing needs is a very large service. The area that maintains the housing register is not the same area that maintains the housing advice part of the service. So by front loading officers into housing advice, it means we can be far more receptive and work much quicker around homelessness prevention and genuine effective housing advice for residents, rather than manually inputting details onto a housing register.
can I just, so what you're anticipating is that there will be some improvements to housing advice as a result of this in the not too distant future, is that right?
There will be increased resources on our excellent housing advice service, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Joseph, because I want to get another one in as well. Councillor Joseph, go ahead, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. Thank you, everybody. So just going back to the papers and the residents' voice then, which is obviously mentioned. We've heard some positive case studies from you guys tonight, which is obviously really good. As councillors, I'm afraid we have a number of not so positive, case studies, and it would have been nice to have residents here tonight to share some of what they've been through. But as you can imagine, I think that's a difficult position for them to be in, being council tenants. To come along and sort of share some of those stories. But there are situations where, people have been mistakenly taken off the register, where we've got involved, and then there's actually been acknowledged that no, actually they are eligible. And there's been some really confusing cases, to be honest with you, where I've had someone entitled to a 4-bed who was told no, they're not, and then they are. But then they were told, well, they couldn't bid for a 3-bed. So that's something I was really keen to sort of clarify, because that was concerning to me. Obviously, 4-beds come up far less frequently in Hackney. So if you're overcrowded in a 2-bed, there's a massive advantage to getting a 3-bed, even though it may not, completely fulfill your need. So I just wanted, I suppose, to clarify where we were with that one. Are we saying that people can't move accommodation if it's slightly too small than desirable, even if it's bigger than what they've currently got? And are we, how are we evaluating this in terms of lessons learned, where there are cases like that, where, mistakes have been made? Is the team is there any evaluation process to try to ensure that, that doesn't happen again, and that people aren't sort of given wrong information? Thank you.
Two parts to your question. I'll let Marcia come in and give you some feedback, but just suffice to say, we don't stop residents from doing anything. We merely match properties to landlords. It's the landlords that make the decision about who can access their property, and Marcia will explain that a bit more to you.
Okay.
So for Hackney Housing, yes, we do. Hackney Housing are the only landlord where they allow overcrowding by one in a 3-bed. Now, each 3-bed has different room sizes. So if we have a 3-bed with all single rooms and we have a family of, say, 6, the lettings officer would not put that family through or nominate them to a 3-bed with 3 single rooms. If there's 2 double rooms or 3 double rooms, then there's possibility they would allocate or nominate the family to that 3-bed. So we need to be very clear that the nominations is based on the number of rooms and the rooms and if they're a double or a single room. So there would always be a reason as to why a resident has been overlooked or bypassed for a property. For the 30 resident providers or housing associations that we have in the borough, each have their own allocations policy. So the lettings officer will nominate a resident, and the final decision lies with the housing association, and that's something that we can't influence. So it's not as straightforward as just overlooking someone.
Thank you. Before we move on to the second one, just briefly, are we taking into account when we're saying that people are not overcrowded? So we're saying people can, for example, use a living room as a sleeping space. Are we taking into account size of the rooms in those cases as well?
We don't give that advice.
No, we wouldn't give that level of details. We would just do the rooms, the number of rooms in the property, and we will match it to the household.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
With regards to errors, we're humans. My staff are human. We are still suffering with the after effects from the cyber attack. Our systems are not as they were prior to the cyber attack, and huge swaths of our service are still working on rather large spreadsheets. We do the best we can in difficult circumstances. We always learn from our mistakes, but we're human at the end of the day and we're not infallible.
Just briefly on that point, I think the experience we had in changing over the housing register demonstrated just how many residents hadn't updated their details with us. We had numbers of letters come back with residents that had moved away, some of them out of borough, some of them in. And we frequently come across cases where we haven't been told of children being born or moving out. So yeah, well, as Jennifer says, we're not infallible, but there are a number of cases where it was people being removed was because we didn't have up-to-date information on them. And those are being corrected as they're brought to our attention, and the residents are telling us, or members are telling us, and we're correcting those and putting them back on the register. I think the majority without any detriment at all in the long term. So it's a two-way process.
And ultimately, we're also governed by the local government ombudsman. So if residents choose to go through the complaints process, they can proceed to LGO outcome. The LGO has been fairly okay with any findings around the housing register. I think we've had probably only 1 or 2 issues that I can think of. And as part compensation, we made sure that the person hasn't lost any waiting time, so they haven't been disadvantaged by any error that's been made, and the LGO has been more than happy with those and made recommendations accordingly.
Well, I've just got I've just got another quick question. It's in respect of the services provided to those who are no longer eligible for the housing register. A suggestion within the report is that there's been limited take-up of the provision that's available to them. However, though, there's no clarity as to the specific reasons for that, although there's a kind of abstract reasoning as to potentially they've got no expectation of ever securing social housing, or maybe they've resolved the circumstances themselves. Is there any analysis of that taking place? Because quite often people who are aggrieved with an organisation are less likely to then engage with them in that capacity. And also within that, if take-up is so low, has scope for recollaboration been considered, particularly in respect of taking on external providers who are able to kind of support them and advise them in that capacity?
With regards to third sector agencies, they receive training from us on a regular basis, as do the grant funded advice agencies on housing advice. So they should be supporting residents anyway, regardless of where they are on the housing register, whether they're on it or not. They shouldn't be turning people away if they're approached. It's part of their contracts that they deliver that advice. There's also a floating support office offer that's commissioned across by the council across the borough, and they are also provided with information so they can support residents. The bulk of residents on the housing register in the past has always been those who are already in social housing. Those tenants tend to have housing officers and good support networks in place. We haven't done any analysis around where people are going for this issue as opposed to any other. No.
Can I just add to that? In the report, you could see that when we did the lettings policy, we had 620 households who were identified that they actually moved away and did not notify the council of their change. You know, and in terms of the back to Councillor Joseph's question on evaluation, what we said is because the transition process will be ending in December, and one of the things we said is we will have, by then we will have done the evaluation and then come back to members to have it as a session so that we'll look in terms of the updates, the detailed report, the detailed reporting and all that, and then the progress. So we still have that for December, and we just want to keep to that timeline of what we have said. I just wanted to chip that in as well.
Okay, thank you. But one last question from Councillor Young.
Hi, just thinking about the review of the new process. I just wondered whether there are any plans to conduct, as part of the review and the ongoing review of this, to take evidence from those other local advice providers and services. I think it is difficult to get feedback from residents directly who are choosing to disengage for the reasons that Soraya mentioned. Really difficult for the team to gather that information. I wondered whether you might get more sort of deeper, more informative feedback from those advice agencies who are working with residents who will know how they felt about their experience working with Hackney.
We meet regularly with the advice providers, Andrew's team particularly. I think what they are seeing more so, rather than conversations around the register, is conversations around the lack of housing. And that is where they are spending most of their time, trying to support people with their day-to-day overcrowding issues and how they maintain a healthy day-to-day experience. Andrew?
Yeah, we've had some very sort of open discussions with the advice partners, and it is very much focused on giving residents the best advice possible. Getting them on the register is, to be honest, neither here nor there. You get someone on the register today, if they're a 2-bed need, they've got a 10-year wait or more. So dealing with their overcrowding is not going to happen by putting them on the register. And you know, we can have that conversation with the support partners, and for them to have with the residents that they can get onto the register if they satisfy the eligibility criteria, but that's not going to address their housing needs today, tomorrow, next year, or the year after. And it's having that appropriate discussion about where they can get support, what options are available to them. That's the most important part of that conversation. It's making sure that residents understand the situation as it stands, what their options are, what decisions they can make to address their housing needs, with the support from the advice partners and from the council. You know, we can support them into PRS moves, bearing in mind that many of them will be already in the PRS. We don't normally suggest that social tenants move out, but those that are already in the PRS, we've got a wide range of support to help them. So it's about having the right conversations with residents and giving them the options that they can take, not ones that they can't or that won't help them.
So this isn't really a question, but just a sort of response. My question wasn't about the outcomes. My question was about people's experiences of dealing with Hackney Council and the housing needs team. So it was really about whether when you're carrying out a review, you will be talking to those advice agencies about the experience people, how people experience that process, not whether they get on the housing register or don't get on the housing register, or indeed whether we can house them, which obviously ultimately is their aim, but how they feel about their experience in dealing with us.
Is it all right for Councillor Etty to respond to that question? So we'll have to
Yeah,
close.
we will be, looking at the process, we'll be happy to take that on board to hear from local advice providers. But what I can say is I'm quite aware that we've had various training with the local advice provider, no doubt about that. And we've had various conversations in which I'm quite aware based on the advice in terms of the housing advice that we've given. And because we actually had consent, and that's why we're also looking at behavioral insights where we have an officer that is working with them. But definitely we will look into that and take that on board and include it in our final review for the outcome to members.
Thank you. We've got Mayor Glanville who just wants to provide a quick response, but within that, I think, would it be possible for us to kind of get some data from the external providers as to what's going on with them and what perceptions of their service users are with regard to their experiences in the council? Thank you. Mayor Glanville.
Yeah, just really conscious of the line of question from Councillor Young and others, and I think getting that external feedback would be really valuable at this stage with the journey the service is going on, but I think also members as well. So there's obviously the work within the service to improve customer experience and to co-produce that customer experience. I think for the reasons that Councillor Joseph suggested, I think members being involved in that process would be vital. And I think also the casework review that's underway that Councillor Chapman is leading with Bruce DeVille, the quality of responses, the tone of those responses, whether they're, aligned with our values is incredibly important as well. So I think there's two avenues that Living in Hackney should perhaps explore. One is, as Councillor Etty has suggested, being more involved in that process as we review the ongoing work. But then I also think submitting something to the work of the casework review and really anchoring it in there, because I think some of that sense of frustration that I'm picking up from members, I think, does need a really structured outlet.
Thank you very much. Thank you for everyone who's kind of attended in respect of this item. We're running quite behind, well, more than a little behind time now. Thank you, Caroline. So we're going to move on to item 5, impact of the cyber attack on the housing register. The cyber attack on Hackney Council in October 2020 left many systems unavailable for council staff to deliver services, and staff have continued to work through backlogs of work that built up when systems were unavailable. The Commission has requested that this item, as it's keen to hear about how the cyber attack has affected residents of the housing register and whether the service has returned to business as usual. The Commission will again be assisted in its discussions by the contributions from Hackney officers alongside the written submissions which were enclosed in the agenda pack, i.e. the reports. Discussion will cover the impact of the cyber attack on the housing register and what's been put in place to mitigate the risks to residents in need. Other attendees other than Rob Miller and Mayor Glanville may kind of provide responses to some of the questions raised by commission members. Attending for this item, we've got Mayor Glanville, lead member for Digital and ICT, Councillor Sade Etty, Mayoral Advisor for Housing Needs and Homelessness, Steve Wellington's here, is that correct?
Yeah, he's not present.
Yeah. Rob Miller, Strategic Director of Customer and Workplace, Jennifer Winter, Head of Benefits and Housing Needs, Marcia I was never corrected. Farsi, does anyone correct me? No. Operations, do you want to correct me?
It's Facey.
Facey, thank you. Operations Manager, Benefits and Housing Needs. Ian Jones, Legislation, Strategy and Projects Officer, Customer Services. Zoe Tyndall, Change Support Team Manager, Digital and Data. And that's it. I'd like to welcome Mayor Glanville to the meeting. Mayor Glanville has cabinet responsibility for this area of work. Councillor Etty, Hackney officers, who will all be in hand to support the discussion. Now I'd like to invite the relevant officer, sitting opposite me here, to give a brief presentation to supplement the written submissions received in advance of the meeting. You have 10 minutes, please. Or are you doing it as a tag team?
No, I'll come in at the end.
Okay. You have up to 10 minutes. Okay. Thank you.
I'll try and keep it briefer than that, so there's good time for questions. So, as many of you know, across the town, the cyber attack happened in October 2020. That affected all the systems we hosted on our own servers. We have already, before that, effectively taking a completed shift to cloud-based services, and really importantly, fully wiring the two together. So there are lots of organisations who've been hit by similar attacks who may well have some of their services in the cloud, but because those were wired to other things running on their own servers, they couldn't use those either. So there have been other councils hit by similar attacks who have no phone system, no website, no email, no paper. So for us, whilst the attack was still hugely important, and you know, again, looking to Jennifer and the teams who had to handle the service impacted by this, it's been astonishing. Our services across the council have focused on our residents and made sure things got done, even with both their hands tied behind their backs. We were in a position where we had more other things available to us than we would have done if we'd been in some of those other councils' shoes, for example. But the impact is still enormous. So for us, what that meant was that the old housing system, which we were already working to replace, which is a complicated thing to do, that was unavailable, and that's where the housing register system sat. So that meant, and the old document management system. So for Marcia and the teams who managed a housing register, they didn't have that system available to them. They couldn't update people's status. They needed to notify us about a change, and they couldn't apply new entries onto the register. So hugely significant. What we did still have is the bidding system for these London lettings, which we use, because that system was separate from our council systems without any links to it. So that meant when we had a bidding number, we reached that stage at their position on the housing register, we're able to continue to bid for choice-based lettings. The team had to do a lot of workarounds without their other normal systems to make sure we were able to facilitate that process and manage moves into homes that became available. But again, the teams were able to put together interim ways of working, which allowed us to make sure we could still let those homes. So we didn't have homes becoming available that we could let through the choice-based lettings process. What we've then done in parallel with those interim ways of working is put in place new systems, and that was referenced earlier in the conversations. Now, as I said earlier, we were already working to replace the old housing system. We had done a lot of work over the 2 to 3 years prior to the cyber to dig deep into where the issues were, which were making it hard for the service to provide the level of service they aspire to, where in many cases fragmentation of processes caused by some of the old systems, clunky ways of working which were necessary to work around some of these old systems, were making it much harder for the teams to do the work they needed to do. So we had significant amount of evidence which was ready had been the subject of research. Work had also taken place. I think the Benefits and Housing Needs Service is one of those services who used most of the largest number of different council systems to provide a truly resident-facing service. So one of the things we had done before the cyber attack was to develop a single view tool, which made it much easier for the team to see relevant information about somebody from across different systems. Now that was unavailable because of the cyber attack, because the systems that it relied on weren't available. But we had some really solid work that had already taken place, firstly to help us understand what better would look like and to set us on a path to putting better in place. So since the cyber attack, work has taken place with our in-house team and with external support and the developers to start the work to build a register system. The intent is to make it much easier for people to access your self-service. You'll see some of the packs here, those of the screen views of the system. It's designed to be much more friendly. As an example, it's designed to not care whether you're on a larger computer or on a mobile phone, because we know that a lot of the interactions people have with services, whether they're council services, private services, people find the phone more convenient to use it. So where we are today, the core system is in place, and Marcia has included in here some of the numbers around where the teams are as of the time of writing, with putting people on their details onto the new register. The intention had been to be further down the line, because the intention was to line this up the new lettings policy coming in place, but obviously the delivery of that was significantly disrupted by the cyber attack. There have been some challenges with getting it in the position it needed to be in, and Martia and team are still working around some of the edges and things which we still plan to put into that, which will allow them to have simpler processes. So I'm not wanting to give the impression that new housing register software job finished, we're all done, but we are at a stage where the team are now making sure that all of those outstanding changes in circumstance are updated and new applications are updated. In the papers, it describes the team have prioritised that, so to make sure that cases where, for example, people would be likelier to be in a position where they could successfully fit for a home, the details are updated. The teams are looking for areas where we can make the most rapid progress. So, for example, if people who've registered as homeless, we have the information we need, and Marcio and team are making sure. I think, Marcio, you're pretty close to being in a position where those homeless cases are updated. I think you've completed singles, and families are in progress now. And then once we have all those cases up to date, and all of the other people who are pending who haven't already received a link to update their information, we'll get that information. In here as well as an important update, we have dates when people approached the service to tell us that they needed to notify us of a change or to notify us they wanted to join the register, and the dates will be updated based on those dates. So people will be in the correct point on the register based on their banding date. So at the moment, we're still in a position where people are waiting to be told if they're on the register and where they are on there. Because of the issues we've talked about before, they would still be some way off being in a position where they would be likely to be high on a bidding process for a home that becomes available, and people who are in a position where that's more likely to be successful already on the bidding system. But we are making sure that people are in the right place so that they're not disadvantaged and find that actually they appear on the register 2 years later than they actually told us that they needed to join it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know if you want to get Mayor Glanville in now. You can do about 5 minutes. That works for you?
Chair, I'll be even quicker than that, just to provide the sort of political oversight to what we put in place after the criminal cyber attack. And I think the way we tried to be open and transparent about the journey. So as Cabinet Member for Digital, I was in a weekly cycle of meetings as we responded to the initial cyber attack, but also as we built towards recovery. I think it was earlier this year, or maybe the end of last, where we did put in place a sort of three-way briefing, reduce the frequency of those meetings. They were weekly, they became bi-weekly and then monthly, but making sure that Councillor Chapman, Councillor Etty, Councillor Nicholson have oversight of the pieces of work that relate to their individual service areas, but also have that overarching sense of the progress towards recovery. There was a separate process underway around sort of mosaic recovery and social care that very much involved Councillor Kennedy, Deputy Mayor Bramble and Councillor Woodley. But if we just sort of focus on the housing piece, taking this sort of insight, taking the members, working through and investing the time in kind of sometimes critical challenge, but also just tracking that journey was the political oversight that I kind of provided. I think the way the audit committee is being used to track the cyber attack and keep members updated and also allow that avenue for kind of critical friend on the recovery journey has been incredibly important. and that work is sort of ongoing. We've also, I think, been really keen to use member drop-ins, briefing sessions, both with the old set of councillors and the new councillor. Rob Miller and I are planning another one of those before the end of the year to give an overarching look at where we are in terms of cyber recovery, checking with members, you know, is the lived experience of members, both themselves and through their casework, chiming with the journey that Rob and the team are leading. And I think also, I'm really struck by seeing the tool again. There was a members drop-in, I think, that Jennifer and Housing Services led, that talks about that tool and the impact that it would have and how it being co-designed with staff and residents. We want to go to return to showcasing actually the areas of excellence, the things we've learned through the recovery, the citizen focus of all of the things that we're building, and how we can give, I think, yourselves that sense, and the public, that we are not just on a road to recovery, but we're producing some of the best sort of tools and systems anywhere in local government. And that's something that, again, we'll give sight to when we do the member drop-in, but also build out from there and think where are the areas of interest that members want to be sort of more involved. And the final part, I think, of that is, you know, every single time I've spoken about this, has been really clear. A criminal act that has been thoroughly investigated in terms of National Cyber Security Agency, National Crime Agency, all the agencies that have supported us, and has had devastating impact on residents. And we are sorry for that collectively. And I think, as Rob said, really determined to take the lessons from that, make sure that it doesn't happen again, but we cannot be complacent. And we've seen, obviously, with the other parts of the public sector that have been attacked here and abroad, that these agents, these criminal agents, are still out there trying to do attacks like this. And I think it is the work and the investment that Rob's team have made with individual service areas that we want to make. We continue to make sure that members and residents see that improvement and response.
Thank you very much. Happy to take any questions from committee members. Oh, Councillor Etty.
I'm sorry, Chair. I just wanted to echo what the Mayor have said, to say we're really sorry with regards to what has happened, but we continue to work with residents, and because at the moment, with regards to the software, I can comfortably say that we've been able to complete those who are singles and updates, and we're in the progress to complete when it comes to families. So we're really sorry when it comes to that, and all lessons have been noted. And one thing is, residents have not been left in view. We have communicated regularly to residents based on this, and this has definitely impacted on our three-way plan that we initially wanted to do, but we're definitely sorry at taking all the lessons.
Thank you, Councillor Etty. Are any questions from Commission members? Councillor Young, then Councillor Joseph, in that order. Thank you.
Just firstly to say, really aware of what an enormous amount of work has gone into trying to rebuild those systems. And certainly as a ward councillor, I have spent a lot of time explaining to residents that it's not because nobody's trying or cares that they, that their change of circumstances hasn't been recorded. It's because you've had to start from the bottom up to build the whole system back up. And I feel very sympathetic to everybody who's having to work with this on spreadsheets. I just wondered what is happening with those kind of last bits of casework which are still waiting behind an update or a recovery or a correction because of cyber attacks. I mean, I have a few, and I'm sure others do as well.
So obviously, as the Mayor said, across the organisation, lots of casework for areas which were particularly impacted, and those ranged. There were some services whose systems were already found where the impact was negligible. There's some where the impact was colossal. So, for example, in health benefits, the work that Jennifer's teams have had to do there simply to make sure that people who were already receiving benefits received their payments was significant, and then making sure that we were getting the monies to who updating their claims or notifying us. With regard to the housing register, Marcia, on those were effectively being grouped together with the updates that you're making to the register, I believe. So over that period where we bring the register up to date, I would expect, without knowing the specific cases, we would be bringing people's, those would be either changes of circumstance or someone has contacted us to say that we've got the wrong details. Sorry, was I wrong?
That's correct, Rob. So anyone that contacted us that were in the reserve band or the general band that were removed have been contacted and their cases dealt with if they qualified to go back on. What we tend to do is when we get a first stage complaint, if it's because someone has yet to join the register or their change of circs hasn't been updated, we do those cases so they don't turn into a stage 2 complaint. And also with all our homeless cases that were accepted homeless cases, so we had over 1,400 of those, we've only got 214 left. So there's about 15% to put on. So we are working through all the residents that wish to apply. No one will be disadvantaged because we will use the date that they contacted us as their effective band date.
And Marcy's team have also segmented a lot of that work into those people that would be nearest securing a social housing property, so they're not put at a disadvantage. So for those people who are going to wait 29 years before they bid successfully, we would probably have them at the bottom of that pile that need attention rather than at the top.
I was thinking more of benefits than the housing register itself. So
This Scrutiny Commission is not on housing benefits, it's on the cyber attack effect on the housing register. So we're not at liberty to answer questions on that. I understand that you'll be we've suggested that if you want to commission a hearing on housing benefits, that we're happy to take that at some point next year.
can't give away that information.
Thank you, Councillor Joseph.
Thank you, Chair. So my question relates to the accepted homeless cases detailed on page 26 of the report. So 1,024 households accepted as homeless. So what I really want to try and understand is how many of them are coming out of the private rented sector or have been almost guided into the private rented sector by us. So I really want us to try and be evaluating the length of stay in that private rented sector. I know we don't want to discuss housing benefit, but I think it is quite linked with the homelessness, because obviously we are seeing some cases where there's been some of our residents have taken up offers of the private rented sector because they've been assured that they'll have the housing benefit top up to their wage to enable them to afford the rent. And where we've not, necessarily made a payment for 2 years because of the cyber attack, then having eviction proceedings brought against them. So I would really like to understand how many of the homeless cases are people that we initially guided into the private rented sector.
Okay. So if you want to do a hearing on homelessness prevention, I'm more than happy to do that and give you the published stats around that. I can tell you off the top of my head that the biggest reason for people approaching homelessness in Hackney is eviction from family and friends. They are not leaving the private rented sector because they're not in it. They are in overcrowded social housing in the main. They're not coming from the PRS. Hope that helps.
Well, there are, with respect, there are cases where.
No, I'm not saying there isn't. I'm just telling you off the top of my head
Yeah.
the reasons for homelessness in this borough reflected by the stats that we submit to DLUC every month. If you want to do a hearing on that, we can do a hearing on homelessness prevention.
Well, it's just because it's mentioned in this report on page 26, so that's
Yeah,
why.
about the homeless cases that are going on to the housing register. That's the situation in which it's it's mentioned. It's not about homelessness or about housing benefit processing.
Okay, well, I think our agenda is set for this year, but I think it would be very, very useful to look at the impact of non-payment housing benefit on our residents due to the cyber attack.
Happy to schedule another hearing if the chair wants to do that, and I think we actually put that in writing to you last September.
You did. If there's scope to have it kind of factor as one of our future kind of agenda items, Jennifer has agreed to kind of do that for us or kind of facilitate that for us. But thank you, Councillor Joseph. But Councillor Garber. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions that relate kind of to resident experience and how people have been kind of kept up to date. So there's just one about how residents up to date with what was happening over the kind of last couple of years and how they continue to be kept up to date and how views from residents we kind of proactively sought about how things are going. And then related to that, have we learned anything about how people access our services from the people that found it difficult to access information during the cyber attack? Does that make sense? Just from casework, I know that there was people that don't have access to the internet and just found it hard to really understand what was going on. So I just wondered if there's any lessons learned from how people need information or access information from us through that.
I can give some feedback on the housing register. So we have our officers that if anyone wants to claim online, they actually assist them and do it for them. So everyone that's contacted us, and just to put into some context, everyone that has contacted us, our officers has called or have made contact with the residents, even especially the ones that would like to apply to join the registers or recorded their change of circs. So we have an officer every single day that goes through every contact that is made by a resident and give them a call back. So that happens on a daily basis. And with the housing register, the officers will put the cases or complete the application forms for the residents who struggle with their digital skills.
Meeting your needs, that response, Councillor Garber? Yeah.
Well, just if anything else on just how, proactive kind of feedback as well. Yeah.
So it depended on the service. So, for example, where people were waiting to register the council tax, we wrote to them and told them that we had their case. We gave them an estimate of the council tax they would be asked to pay, and gave them some expectations on timescales. With in the planning service, for example, we had already moved to a new cloud-based system. We lost data that was in the old system that hadn't been determined yet. We wrote to those applicants and asked them to resubmit, because that's the fastest way to get their case through the planning system. So it kind of depended on which service and where we would be, what the route to the recovery process would be. Just slightly, we don't get questions. It depends. There's quite a lot of different services. Like Marcia says, within the housing register, what we've been doing is telling people that we've had their case, but we haven't been able to give them the option to then get it processed. But that's the stage that we're doing now. Does that make sense?
Okay, I've got a couple of quick questions before I move on to Councillor Palace, so I'm running very, very quick. It's just in respect of the applicants on the new register. The kind of, like your officers, we're front facing and we deal with the complaints, in our surgeries or when we encounter people out in the public. So I'd just like to get a kind of understanding of the timeframes now involved. So in terms of the reserve band, on page 26, it highlights over 110 inquiries asking for a reconsideration, 67 applicants now qualified under the new rules. So moving on from there, in terms of the timing of this process, how long does it take before they're able to get fully on the register and able to start bidding? And is all of this now able to be communicated with them directly? Likewise, in terms of the time frame, in terms of installing the changes to the customer contact centre, call, people who respond by telephone, how long did it take to kind of implement that? Because again, there were initial concerns, it's now historical in terms of it taking, for some people, up to an hour to get through to people. Have all of these problems now dissipated, everything now resolved in terms of communicating with council officers, and how long did it take to bring that about? Thank you.
Yeah, so so that's been an area where which Jennifer's team and Ronald Spring and the customer operations team have been working on together. Often those wait times, it's complicated because it depends if the customer contact teams are getting repeated calls because people are trying to find out their position, for example, with a pending registration housing register, and that then means that it takes us long to answer the phones. The teams work together for additional cross training, so we effectively are able to bring more people to answer those calls when there is an unusual level of housing needs or housing advice calls. They've also worked together to provide a kind of redesign the different options that people get, just to help prioritise better. So just for example, looking at the figures for last week, the average waiting time was just a shade over 2 minutes. The longest was 29 minutes, but that will very much depend on the waiting time. And 88% of the calls were answered, so that was 799 calls answered. So we've seen a really dramatic improvement in that call handling, and that's been done by that joint working across the housing needs teams and the customer services team. So that's the kind of approach we're trying to take across the board, because it's very easy to only focus on the symptom, but unless we get to the underlying, what are the steps that we need to take to change a process or provide training so that we can adapt people's capacity more, will never really improve the experience of residents. So it's definitely a big impact. We're working with other services as well.
I didn't catch, so I think it was mentioned. So within that, there is now the capacity for residents to press a button and get a call back from officers.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's been a really joint political piece of work between Councillor Chapman, myself, and Councillor Etty. And Councillor Etty has been a really passionate advocate for those changes and then reported them across the system. I don't see Councillor Etty wants to come in, but very much being led by her in the context that Rob talked about.
Thank you, Vinnick. Go ahead, Councillor Etty.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, just to echo what the Mayor and Rob have said, and just additional stats in terms of the answer rate when it comes to homelessness, it's now at 92% compared to what we have before. I mean, there's been massive improvement. Before July, I mean, April to June, we were having those difficulties, no doubt about that, but a lot has changed when it comes to housing needs telephone service. And you can imagine the number of telephone calls that we were receiving. And that was 5,000 from April to June. Let me just give you an example. We received 5,100 calls per month. So that is very, very huge. And that was when residents were experiencing prolonged waiting time. But everything has changed now based on what Rob said, and we'll continue to ensure that that improvement stays with regards to our residents. So I think it's a message that we can comfortably tell residents and take that forward.
Thank you. So is it just also possible to get a quick response in the kind of now anticipated timeframes from being recognised as qualifying for the housing register through to being able to bid? Because I think that's one of the kind of historical complaints that we receive as councillors, the timeframe taken previously when we were at the kind of in the midst of the initial cyber attack.
In terms of somebody making a new application, how long that would take to join the register?
Yeah, in terms of acknowledgement through to then being on the register and being able to actively bid, or are there still any kind of issues in terms of that process?
So I think in the last Jennifer will be us and working to clear the remaining cases on the backlog there. We're not in a position where we'd be business as usual, although the end is in sight with that. Martin and Jennifer, what would be the normal time frame for application to be considered and then to be on the register?
Right, so there's a lot of anomalies with that. It's not as straightforward. Completing the application form, the feedback from users and user experience is really positive. It's really simple and easy to navigate through the application form. Lots of positive feedback from residents. Obviously it's the supporting evidence. So if someone makes an application form, it's the waiting for the supporting evidence. 9 times out of 10, they don't have the evidence to hand. Once the evidence is submitted, and the medical evidence is submitted, because most people do say they have a medical now. That's what we found, there's an increase in medical requests. The officers have 20 days to complete and process the application form, and they are actually doing that within the time frame of 20 days. So if someone puts an application form, we get all the supporting evidence to make an assessment. It's processed within 20 days of the information being received, and that turnaround time is happening.
Thank you very much. Councillor Palace and then Councillor Joseph.
Is this one going to work? Is that one right? Hello? Yeah, can you? Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. Yes. So one community where there's a very high level of housing need, but different kind of levels of access to internet is the Haredi community. And normally the need is somewhere in 5 to 6 bedrooms. I was just wondering what the kind of as a result of cyber attack, how we've been approaching the Haredi community and in ensuring that they're aware of changes, and what we've seen in terms of kind of again, I don't know if you have this is a breakdown, whether you could tell us anecdotally about what the kind of uptake has been since the cyber attack of kind of getting back on or attempting to get back onto the register from the community, the challenges that they've faced. Thank you.
Right, I can answer that quickly. Yeah, because I've got to jump off because I'm in the HSC and I'll be locked in 3 minutes. But most of our Haredi Jewish community households didn't actually come off the register because most of them were in the urgent ban, a high percentage, and they transferred over to Ban B. So we didn't find many gaps in them having to reapply. And the ones that have reapplied, like I said, there's support for them. And I personally haven't had any feedback. It's more to do with the change of certs. I would say that their change of certs may not have been updated. That's what our most queries are from them.
Predominantly having more children.
Yeah.
Which quite often increases the waiting time, doesn't decrease it. We also use Agudas Israel Community Services quite effectively. They're a massive support to that community. Andrew, did you want to come in as well? I saw your hand up.
I was just going to say there's a lot of support from ward councillors in those areas who advocate well for their constituents. We work with to address their residents' concerns and give them answers. But given the wait times for the properties that they're looking to bid for, the delays of 1 or 2 weeks has a minimal impact on their likelihood of successfully bidding for properties.
Can I just ask one quick? Is that possible? In terms of Jennifer Mayrow to come in here and then say this is for another day. But in terms of the options which are being put forward following the cyber attack to the Haredi community going forward, what are they kind of looking like? In terms of private rental sector, or what does that look like at the moment?
The options haven't changed regardless of the cyber attack. The property market isn't affected by the cyber attack. The options are the same that they've always been for that community, sadly. They wish to remain within the N16 area, within walking distance to their synagogue. They're densely populated in that area. There are particular concerns around planning and property standards in that area. And essentially, there's very few options for families of that size. I'm aware that there was some work by members of the community some years ago to establish a community down in Canby Island that had limited success. But yeah, there are very few. Councillor Palace.
Thank you, Councillor Joseph. Would you like the final question?
Oh, go on then. Thank you. I will be with two, but they're really quick.
Okay.
Right. So thank you so much. So the first one is just very briefly in terms of emergency housing. Has that been impacted at all? So say if someone needs to be housed in temporary accommodation tonight, is that quite a separate process? Would you still be able to deal with that? There wouldn't be a backlog. Yes, no.
Homeless is very separate to the housing register. Yeah.
Thank you. And the other one was just in terms of some of the major housing associations, for example, Clarion also recently suffered a cyber attack. And there's obviously been frustrations from those residents as well. So what I was keen to understand in terms of transferring into different sized properties, some of the larger housing associations don't do transfers anymore in-house. They will send residents to the council. And sometimes there's a bit of a bounce back from residents where they're saying, well, the housing association sent me to the council and the council sent me back to the housing association. So I'm just wondering, what is the stance on that with registered providers? Are they passing on all their voids to us? Do they just pass a percentage on? Does it depend on the housing association? And how are you working with Clarion, considering that they've also had this attack? Sorry.
The relationship with registered providers in the borough is managed by the housing strategy team and James Goddard in the climate, homes and economy division directorate. From our limited work with housing associations, we have a nominations agreement that has been in place across the whole of East London that dictates how many units they should give to us, and that depends on whether they are new build or whether they are existing relets and the sizes of them. So that is monitored by the housing strategy team on a quarterly basis, and then any deficit is discussed between them and the registered providers. They do hold back a certain percentage of their properties, and those are the ones they should be using to deal with their high profile emergency rehousing cases, particularly domestic abuse and gang violence, more of which we are seeing directed to the council, knowing that we don't have the property to accommodate them either. What irritates me hugely is the fact that most registered providers have far more property than we have in Hackney, yet still persist with not supporting their tenants in that respect.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. I know Phil wants to come in. And before he does, I think I made a stick in another question there. It's with regard to, in terms of looking ahead, when we think we are likely to see the light at the end of the tunnel in respect of this process of getting us to where we need to be with our systems.
So I just picking up Councillor Palace's point about hope for the Rady community. I suppose it takes a lot of work to do something like Tower Core. I know Agida Israel is very keen to get back into development again and having discussions about sites in relation to the Stamford Hill Area Action Plan as well. So, and we're making sure that we join those dots behind the scenes and make sure that, you know, when we're looking at property and when we're looking at something like the sale of Clock House, we're making our partners and colleagues aware of the options that they might be able to take in that direction. In terms of the housing associations, housing strategy are working on 3 significant pieces of work. One is updating our data set. So the strategic housing assessment work, which will feed into both the housing strategy work, but also provide a data set for the Affordable Housing Commission when it gets up and running. And that data set about what is the housing need in the borough across all 10 years, private rent sector overcrowding, how that then features into planning policy, but how we then also work with our partners in housing associations is really important. The housing strategy work, the sort of statement leading into the housing strategy refresh will be coming up through cabinet, and then next year is very much a focus on the housing strategy development work. And that team has also been looking at how there is a sort of housing association registered providers compact that the council has with its housing associations. It is updating that. The reality is we're never going to get a Hackney compact through every board of every housing association in Hackney, but the sort of subgroup of the it used to be called the it used to sit under the housing association, the partnership structure with the council. The operational teams are looking at that compact. Some of it is around the lettings work that Jennifer's been talking about. Some of it is around our sort of overall strategic approach. It's obviously the performance issues that ward colleagues know all too often, but to sort of place our relationship with the housing associations through an updated compact into a sort of modern context. And time again, we've been really probing whether we are getting the allocations we deserve, whether we're picking up that burden, as Jennifer suggested, around some of the complex cases. And I hope that that sort of compact work and the refresh, I'm sure James, either formally or informally, would be very happy to kind of take the Commission through that, share a copy of the compact. And I think the early part of next year is when that compact will go to Cabinet, is my understanding, to sort of show that reset with housing associations in the borough, which hopefully links across to Councillor Jason's sort of wider strategic point. But I'll let Rob outline the journey to the sunny uplands. But in all seriousness, I do think in the information that you've received, there's a very clear set of targets to restoration by the end of the year of some of these significant platforms we've been talking about, and clearances of backlog. As I think the team have suggested, will that go down to every last complex case? No. But are we very firmly through those critical phases of recovery? You know, yes. And Rob can probably outline what that sort of final few weeks of the year will look like, and then what might still overhang into the start of next. Sorry, I should have put my mic on.
Thanks. Okay. I think one of the things that we try very hard to be talking actively with residents throughout our process, which the start of the recovery work was especially hard because, firstly, throughout and continues to be the case as part of that criminal investigation. So there are some areas where we just can't share what we would otherwise want to share. But also in those very early stages, there were so many things we didn't know the answer to. As we've gone through the recovery process, been able to give clearer information. And as the Mayor highlights in the updates that the team included in the paper here, we're now in a position where we can give much firmer guidance backed up by numbers. For example, where we are with register. Some services which were equally impacted have reached that sort of point of declaring something approaching normal or even actively normal earlier on in the year. I think if we think back 12 months, we were on that route to more solid recovery, and now things like council tax are normal, business rates are normal, land searches being caught up, albeit with some data that we're still not able to provide. So there's nuance from where a service is now caught up with its backlogs. I think within the area here, set out, we'll be in that position, like Marcia says, where people will be contacting us and we will be able to give them the outcome of their housing register within a time frame that we would aim to do. So we could declare that as normal. However, then we're still facing the many other challenges, housing supply and actually helping people find housing that meets their needs. With for a resident who's been waiting a long time, for whom the cyber attack is a significant part of that experience, it won't be a thing which is finished for them. So I think it's quite complicated, and what we've always wanted to say, I think one of the early pieces that we did with the local media, the Mayor was clear that we wouldn't be sort of raising our banner across the town saying mission accomplished, just because of all of that complexity underneath there. But as we know, I mean, you mentioned Clarion, there's huge private, public sector, other sort of agencies in public service who've been impacted and continue to be impacted by these. So we're also working very hard to share our experience, and also, as I said earlier, some of those things which meant that we avoided a scenario which could have been a great deal worse. With this, I'm taking other councils one more way to take them through some of that experience to help them consider whether where would they be and how would they respond.
Thank you very much. I see Councillor Etty's waving at me. Is this going to be very brief, Councillor Etty?
Yeah, I mean, just to give a start based on what Councillor Joseph asked and Claire Joseph on Clarion Housing. Just to let you know that in the last 1 year, we've only been able to have 15 leads from Clarion Housing. We continue to be the highest so far with 399, and the whole registered provider collectively is 253. So definitely, just like the mayor have said, there is scope for more work to be done and within the housing strategy, and that will be going to the cabinet, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that brings our agenda items to end. I just want to thank all of the officers who are working hard on behalf of the residents of Hackney. We do appreciate what you're doing, even though you may find our questions a bit of an irritant at times. That's our job, but ultimately, thank you. You know you're working under difficult circumstances.
Thank you. Yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone else for attending as well. Good Meg Anson. Okay. Well done. Next final item.
Got minutes, and they've got the work programme.
Item 7. Item 6, sorry. Minutes of the meeting. Previous meetings, I should say. Draft minutes of the previous meetings held on the following dates are included within the agenda pack for members to note and agree. 7th of January 2022, 7th of March 2022, 13th of July 2022. I know some members weren't here for the January meeting or the March meeting. So yeah, it's up to a few of us to agree there. Those two. 17th of January, 7th of March. Councillor Root, Councillor Ozen, Councillor Joseph.
You weren't here.
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you, Kate.
We believe you.
They are very accurate. 13th of July. This is the everybody one. Yeah. Dr. Cal. Good afternoon to know.
I don't think It's still being live streamed, yeah.
You had a better one?
Not for the, no,
Not for 13th.
no, for the minutes. Question for minutes.
Okay. All right.
I can approve them.
Okay. We're agreeing the 13th of July. Okay, Councillor Barrett had an arrival.
Just a question on, because I know lots of information has been circulated following the meeting on the 13th of July, which is really positive, like lots of positive resident outcomes. But and I know there's a separate meeting than what we had with the children and young people. Just a bit anxious that we still haven't had information back, and we asked some quite significant questions. I know that it was a special joint one, and we have the minutes here, and it's separate on the website. But I do feel like we need to just note that there's like I'm waiting for some information. It was like 5 hours. Straight. Considering how significant that case was.
Yeah.
Just that noted.
It's for coming up, just for changes in respect, in terms of our kind of remit, in terms of police instructions as well, which kind of hampered having the information as quickly as we would have.
Yeah.
So it's what's coming.
And I've seen that a letter's gone out.
Yeah,
really
yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I just
Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Garbutt. Item 7, Living in Hackney Work Programme 2022-23. Commission members are asked to consider and agree the work programme for the next municipal year.
So sorry, Chair, could you just hold one sec? Just trying to find it.
Okay.
Thank you.
You got it? Okay. You would have noted that something has dropped off in retrofitting. In terms of, we've got a narrower time frame in which to kind of take forward our work programme up until the end of the municipal year. That piece of work in itself is not ready in terms of co-production with officers and external agencies, and it is a substantial piece of work which requires kind of a lot of attention and a lot of kind of inputs. And I think we do it a disservice if we just kind of narrowed it down to half a session or a session in itself. It wouldn't be sufficient in order to get that done.
Chair, can I just, this is retrofitting.
Yes.
Okay. Can I just ask about retrofitting? Is it in fact something which would also be scrutinised by another committee as a skills.
Not necessarily. I mean, skills and employment probably would look at it in terms of a green economy.
That's what I was wondering, was
potentially.
could it be scrutinised under the kind of environmental umbrella rather than the housing umbrella?
I think aspects of it can, but the housing element of it would be scrutinised by us. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just really keen that right at this point, in this being this year, when we've got the social housing decarbonisation fund, applications are open now.
Yeah.
This is a massive issue. We've got our climate action plan. We should be holding our officers to account on this. I know there's nothing to be done here. It's sort of, can we make sure that we're talking to other scrutiny
We
commissioners?
can do it in that respect, and also to just kind of get information from officers, which we can kind of. Go ahead, Claire. Right, sorry.
It's probably worth clarifying as well, but you'll remember last year there was quite a large piece of work on the council's approach to climate change that was undertaken. My understanding is that that's being wrapped up by officers and chairs and vice chairs at the moment, and we're hoping that that will be taken to scrutiny panel in February.
Okay.
So that will form part of our scrutiny work there.
Thanks.
But we could probably receive a written update from officers, kind of make representation. Yeah. They would like this information. Can you make sure you're doing it properly?
Yeah.
Yes. Along those lines.
Yeah.
But more formal.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. That's the route.
Yeah, no, I didn't want to ask about retrofitting. Sorry. I did want to ask about when we might fit in something about housing benefit and the cyber attack, because I do think it's very important.
It is. It's just unfortunate the way that we phrased things made it difficult to kind of bring it in fully, but the connection was made in terms of the discussions that were had here this evening, and I do think that we do have to give it more attention about how we do that.
Sure. I also wonder whether we could bring in council tax under the same umbrella as well, because similar sorts of issues.
Yeah. Even if it's just a kind of brief, it would probably have to be half a session.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, totally agree on retrofit. That's a really great response. We get a written response. It's just because I have the printed version from September. I compared the work programs, and I just wondered what happened to the neighbourhood housing office.
Because they've already had it. Yeah. There was nothing that we could add in terms of the resident voice, in terms of what we think, in terms of
more of it as it was live.
Just in terms of looking again in this kind of updating way, is there any way that we could ask for an update on how the weekly surgeries are going and what they're, so that we've just got a written report on that? That would be quite useful.
Yeah.
And just to note on the drugs one, which is brilliant that it's staying where it is on it. I know that we had a conversation about that at the last meeting, but we did talk about kind of linking it with the health. We did mention linking it with health, and I just wondered if that was discussed, or I know it's tricky to align committees.
Yeah.
If it was something that we could at least try and link with them.
I think, it's because there's, in terms of a drug meeting, that's probably not possible, and because ours is a very specific remit, the crossover doesn't exist in the way that it did with Child Q. Could potentially ask for something important in terms of any analysis that they've done, but then definitely.
It's just because you see like a London level. The health committee.
It's just bringing health professionals to kind of.
Maybe I'm really happy to help kind of shape kind of who witnesses, the witnesses that kind of talk about, the kind of social justice. Someone touch a lot of group stuff.
Thank you very much. Right, is that great then? In terms of, as well as additional bits in terms of getting feedback from, in respect of the how surveys are working, retrofit, ask for written responses. Is it agreed on that basis?
Yes, it is agreed.
Thank you very much. Any other business? Okay. Oh, please can I remind all members that a training session for all overview and Scrutiny Commission members have been scheduled for Monday, the 28th of November at 6:30 p.m. But yeah, I hope to see as many of you as possible. Likewise. Is there any other business? No. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Craig, for all the support for the meeting and for all managing all the.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you.
Craig.
No problem.
And thank you, Chair.
Thank you all. You've been a wonderful commission. Yeah.